Hello friends, in this video lecture we are going to see concept of mask. It is also known as masking related to IPv4 addressing. For this concept you have to refer book TCP IP protocol suite by Frozen. Let's see the concept of masking. In the previous tutorial of classical addressing we have discussed how to find block and range of addresses in the block with the help of network addresses. Means network address is given, in that case we can find block and range of addresses in the block. But if the reverse condition is there, means to find network address from the given address we need mask. If an address is given, we can find the network address. Network address is basically beginning address in the block. Here beginning address in the block is network address and beginning address in the class is net ID. We have already covered this concept, net ID and host ID. Here this beginning part is known as net ID and this part after net ID is known as host ID, and the beginning address in the block is known as network address. You have to clear yourself here regarding these two concepts, network address and the network ID. To route a packet to the correct network, router needs to extract a network address from the destination address, that is host address in the packet header, and this complete address, which is of 32 bit, gives the first address in the block, that is network address, when it performs bitwise AND operation with an address in the block. So let's see how to find network address. To find network address, first find the class of address and the net ID, and this finding class is already covered there in the previous tutorial. Then you have to set the host ID part to 0 to find the network address. Example is 134.45.78.2. This is IPv4 address of 32 bit. Identify the class of address. Class of address is B. We know that range of class A is from 0 to 127 and range of class B is from 128 to 191. Means this address belongs to class B. If class B is there, then first part network ID is of 2 byte and remaining part, that is host ID, is also 2 byte. 2 byte means 16 bits. Net ID is of 16 bits and the host ID is of 16 bits. Means this first 2 bytes belongs to net ID and this 278.2, this 2 bytes belongs to host ID. And the second part is you have to set host ID to 0. So what is the host ID? 78.2 is the host ID. We have set host ID to 0. This is host ID. We have set to 0 and this part belongs to net ID. So this is the network address 134.45.0.0, and this type of method is feasible when there is no subnetting and complete network is undivided. Now let's see how to find network address. This masking uses bitwise AND operation, and this AND operation is applied bit by bit to the address and the mask. Bits in the address corresponding to the ones in the mask are preserved, either 0 or 1 as they were, and bits in the corresponding zeros in the mask change to 0. So let's see how it performs the task. If mask, this is the address in the block, and mask, so this address in the block and the mask perform the AND operation, and you get the beginning address here. Beginning address means which address? Network address. If the bit in the mask is 1, the corresponding bit in the address is written in the output. That is no change. Means mask is 1 and address in the block, let's say, is X, then beginning address X is written. And if the bit in the mask is 0, a 0 bit in the output is the result. Mask is 0 and address in the block, let's say address is X, in that case you get the 0 as the beginning address, that is network address. Let's say default mask related to 3 classes. In this AND operation for classful addressing, there are 3 masks, one for each class. For class A, mask is of 8 ones and 24 zeros, and in dotted decimal it is written as 255.0.0.0, means this part belongs to host ID and this part belongs to net ID. First byte of class A belongs to net ID and remaining 3 bytes belongs to host ID. Then for class B, the default mask is of 16 ones, that comprises net ID, and 16 zeros, that comprises host ID. In dotted decimal it is written as 255.255.0.0. and for class C, the default mask is of 24 ones, and this part is of net ID, and 8 zeros, means this part belongs to host ID. 3 bytes which all are ones, and 1 byte which is of 8 zeros. In dotted decimal it is written as 255.255.255.0. Here the ones preserve the net ID, the zeros set the host ID to 0. You have to remember one thing here, that network address in any class is the net ID with host ID or zeros. Number of ones in each class matches the number of bits in the net ID, and the number of zeros matches the number of bits in the host ID. In other words, when the mask is ANDed with an address, the net ID is written and the host ID is set to 0, as we have seen in the previous example. Let's see how to apply the mask. This method of applying the mask is simple to an unsubnetted network, means the network is not subnetted. There are 2 important rules here. If the mask byte is 255, it returns the corresponding bytes in the address, and if the mask byte is 0, it sets the corresponding byte to 0, as we have performed in the AND operation. If the byte is 255, means having value 1, in that case the corresponding value in the address is written, and if the bit, that is mask, is 0, in that case 0 is written. Let's see example here. Given the address 23.56.7.91, find the beginning address. Beginning address means network. What is the class of address? Class of address is A. Okay. And what is the default mask? Default mask for class A is 255 dot 0 dot 0 dot 0. And what is the net ID here? Net ID is 23, means this 23 is preserved. That is, net ID 23 is preserved because of this default mask 255 and remaining bytes set to 0. This is the network address. This is the one way. And another way is you have to identify the class. Class is identified. Class of address is A. Then net ID is 23 and you have to set host ID, that is this part, host ID to 0. This is net ID. In this complete 23.0.0.0 is the network address, that is beginning address in the block. Let's see another example. Given the address 132.6.17.85, find the beginning address, that is network address. What is the class of address? This address belongs to class B. Class B. This first 2 byte is of network ID and this 2 byte belongs to host ID, as the class of address is B. Default mask for class B is 255.255.0.0. Remember, the address is given there in the dotted decimal format. That's why we are going to use dotted decimal default mask. If the address is given in the binary value, then we have to use default mask in the binary notation. In this case, first 2 bytes belongs to network ID, which is having a default mask 255.255 will be as it is, means 132.6 remaining bytes set to 0. You can use alternative method, that network ID is 132.6 and host ID is 17.85. Then we can set that host ID to 0 and the net ID values will be as it is. 132.6.0.0 is the network address. Third case, given the address 201.180.56.5, class of this address is C and default mask is 255.255.255.0, means first 3 bytes which are of network ID will be preserved, 201, 180 and 56. These 3 bytes will be preserved and remaining byte, that is of host ID, set to 0. This is the network address. If you like this video, then please subscribe this channel, like this video and share. Thank you.